Welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast with your charismatic host and prominent safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin. Be entertained and informed as the Safety Doc discusses both best and bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. The truth will keep you safe. Follow Dr. Perrodin on Twitter at SafetyPhD.
Hi, everybody. This is David, and welcome to podcast 33 of the Safety Doc Show. How the famous Robbers Cave experiment defines the torus and self-similarity. We have a little bit of a thunderstorm going on right outside of the Safety Doc studios, so might hear a little bit of rumbling in the background, but I think it's going to move through pretty quickly. I recently returned from a family vacation up in Door County, Wisconsin. Go-karts. We also did the Cana Island Lighthouse. You can look it up, C-A-N-A, Cana Island Lighthouse. It's a lighthouse on Lake Michigan, and was built in 1868. Took a tractor pulling a wagon, kind of like a hay wagon ride. There's a passageway, a stone passageway to get to the island from the mainland, but that's underwater right now. Lake Michigan's been high the last couple of years, so we took this tractor ride over and then climbed up the all of the steps of the circular cast iron stairway to the top of the lighthouse, and we're able to go out on the little observation deck which goes around it, take a look at Lake Michigan, then come down and of course get some family photos. Very fun time up in Door County, just a relaxed pace. It was kind of funny because before we went up, the weather forecast was, it's going to be raining and it's going to be windy and it's going to be cold. And we did get a little bit of rain, but it was very nice weather. We couldn't have asked for better weather really up there. We got to do everything that we wanted to do. So we really were fortunate in that regard. A couple of funny anecdotes. I do have a cross, a crucifix that I wear. I've worn for a number of years. It was a gift to me. It's very old and is constructed out of iron nails. And I did have a jeweler work to kind of reconfigure it, recraft it, make it more durable. And what's happened is the nails are starting to rust a little bit, okay? So I took it back and I said, is there any type of sealant, any shellac or anything we can put on this? And he said, well, you could always oil it and that would keep it from rusting. And now it's not a significant rust. It's not like I have a rust pattern on my chest or it ruins my clothes or anything like that. But I said, okay, like oil, like a 3-in-1 oil or whatever, like a little squirt of WD-40. He's like, yeah, that would do it. I'm thinking, no, I'm not going to oil jewelry that I wear. I can just imagine every shirt that I would own then would have a oil stain in the middle of it. So I'm like, no, I'll deal with it until I come up with a better plan. And I'm pretty sure it's probably going to outlast me. I think this thing is perhaps hundreds of years old, at least the nails. They're the old square nails. But anyway, kind of a funny story because, as he's telling me this, I'm thinking, dude, would you actually do this though if this was yours? Would you dip this thing in oil like every morning and wear it to preserve it just a little bit longer? I'm thinking probably not. But anyway, he did a tremendous job with the putting it all together. And initially, when it was given to me, was bound together with woven together with thread. So I hadn't thought about this for a while, but we were up on vacation, of course, saw the different gift stores in Door County, very famous for very unique gifts, places from around the world. Reminded me a little bit of Disney when we were at Epcot, but we were at Animal Kingdom in Disney, and there was a man who was dressed in African native garb, which I would assume, I've never been to Africa, so it looked African, and he kind of had his little hut stand set up, and he's carving a piece of wood, and all around he has this display of different types of animals that he's carved. So actually I have two. I bought a hippo per the recommendation of my daughter. I also bought an eagle. And I like both of them. I have them in front of me right now. They're very nice to look at. But as I saw this, and I saw this man, it is, Disney does such a wonderful job of placing you in the illusion of being in a specific environment at a specific time. I didn't realize it until, just a few days ago, thinking, who I bought this from. Now, the guy was super nice, but the reality is, underneath his native garb, he probably had on his Nikes and, like an Adidas t-shirt or something like that. When his day was done, he probably, got in his Camry, went to Kissimmee, threw something in the microwave, was watching some TV and whatever. It's like, this guy didn't go back to like his hut in Africa, that night. This was Disney Orlando. Okay. So, but I just got a kick out of that because again, I didn't, you don't realize that. At least you get kind of so, captured into the moment, and especially also Epcot. Disney again does a wonderful job of providing, these replicas of different, these miniaturized replicas of maybe a few city blocks of this is China, this is Norway and whatever. And of course, it's the extremes of what those would be to really try to expose you to some different cultures. But the reality is these people all go home when the day is done, and probably, change into their jeans and their running shoes and do things, just like any of us would do. So it's role playing. Nothing wrong with that. But again, it was something like I bought these because of the authenticity and these two wooden things. And I'm like, I'm not even sure that this guy actually made these. He might just be there every day, like putting a few, with his little dull knife, putting a few little marks in this piece of wood that looks like he's carving it because, no one's going to be watching it from start to finish. And maybe he did. Maybe he carved all these things in it. And if he did, he certainly has quite a level of talent. So, I just thought that was kind of funny. Just again, how our environment can, in our expectation, my expectation, when your expectation is to see that and then the environment closely matches that, that's what you see, because like the animal kingdom is made to be so close to, what an outsider's perception would be of Africa. So when you go there, the signage and how everything is laid out and even the weathering of things and stuff like that. But so anyway. Hey, we're going to get into some intellectual stuff because you know what? You guys are awesome. I had the best analytics ever for the Safety Doc podcast. Of course, a big part of that goes to our guest last week, Aaron Clary, who spoke very directly on his book, Reconnaissance Man, and Poor Richard's Retirement, his latest essay, both available on Amazon.com. And Aaron also making sure that the news of our interview was circulated throughout his community, and he has a rather robust following. But hey, the analytics continue to look great. We're going to set a record. We've already shattered a record for impressions in a month on Twitter, for downloads, for the podcast. And all of the formats, we're doing great. We shattered, anything we've done on SoundCloud so far. It's just continuing to grow. So stay with me. And I promise, maybe not every episode is going to resonate with you, but I think parts of episodes are going to resonate with you, especially the guests that we have lined up. And I'm being asked on a lot of shows too. I'm doing a show Monday and then a show later, next week also. So actually Monday I'm going to be, I don't have that readily available before me. So, which just says I'm doing a lot of shows right now, and talking and starting to talk about the book that I'll be, having come out through Roman and Little Field Lessons of Lord Manhattan, talking about the 9/11, 2001 boat rescue of Lord Manhattan. and just a number of things related to safety and agency and purpose and things like that. So today, though, again, how the famous Robbers Cave experiment defines the torus and the self-similarity. It sounds a little overwhelming on the surface. Let me break it down for you again. You are the exceptional listener, okay? You want to learn about, terminology, expand your vocabulary, come into these power conversations with your friends, with your colleagues, and be able to use these different terms and then to reflect upon them about how they impact your own personal safety and impact your own life. So let's talk about torus, okay? Torus, T-O-R-U-S, torus. Real world examples of a toroidal object, okay, would be like an inner tube or a bagel. So just think of like a bagel being round, not really having a big center, but being round, okay, in three-dimensional, being round. That's a torus. I'm going to explain what this really means, okay? So when you function within the torus, which most of us do most of the time, okay, what it means to function within the torus. And this is a scientific, this is a research term, but most of our lives function within a torus. So let's say, though, I drew a circle on a piece of paper. I traced a circle on a piece of paper. So it's one dimensional. It's that circle. So that is not a torus because there is no variation that you're going to have within that circle. You have to stay within that circle. Now, if you have that bagel, let's talk about that bagel. There's room inside that bagel. So if you're traveling in a circle inside of that bagel, you can kind of go a little bit up, a little bit down, a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. So every time, if you're just going around in that bagel, every time you go around might be a little bit different, but you're still getting back to kind of your start. You hit your end point, start, end point. But if it's a straight line, it's very rigid. Like there can't be any variance from that. So a torus is again, think of it as a bagel, and I'm going to give you a very specific example so you can understand what a torus is. But your life operates within a torus, hopefully, because if it doesn't operate in a torus, it operates outside of that, and with a lot of chaos. And I'm going to talk about this in a different podcast, but we do know that people can only tolerate chaos, living in a chaotic environment for so long. And for soldiers, studies since World War I, there was a soldier or a study done by a researcher named Appel, Appel. That, again, will be the focus for another podcast. But basically, even, the most field weathered, prepared soldier can last, about 200 days of continuous combat. And that's it. Like, that's it. Like, couldn't make it any longer than that. Either is going to be, killed or is just going to, cognitively lose it and maybe, be unable to function. But it's about where the limit lies. So again, within a torus, most of us function within this torus. I'll talk about this a little bit more. Give some examples on that. So an outcome basin. You're like, Dave, terminology. Come on. It's crazy, buddy. I'm only going to give you a feel. Okay. Torus, outcome basin. If you're in a torus, then we can say it's predictable. Okay. It's predictable. So if you're functioning within this torus, if you're inside of this bagel and you have to get from the stop, your stop to the top of the bagel, and you have to work your way around through the inside of the bagel back up. That's predictable that you're going to get back in there as long as you stay kind of within that bagel. If something is beyond the torus, then we can say it's not patterned or predictable, and hence this marks the entering of chaos. So if something completely happens, it throws you out of this torus, this three-dimensional, like on 9/11, the attacks on the 9/11 towers threw people out of their torus. A torus for a lot of people, and I talked to Dr. Paul Rapp, and we'll transcribe that discussion I had with him. But, that would have been, you get up in the morning, you expect to get on the subway, you're going to stop at your Starbucks on your way, into your office, on on one of the floors. You're going to grab your things, get up to the office, open up your bag, take your things out, fire up your computer. That's all within the torus, okay? Now, that's all within the three-dimensional torus, meaning, you're not going to be on the subway on the same exact subway car every day in the same place. You're not going to arrive at the same minute to work. The coffee cup isn't going to be filled to the same height every single day. It's not going to be maybe the same temperature, the same people in the elevator, the same, thing that's going to be going on at work the same day. So you do have variations within the torus, but generally, that you get up in the morning, you're going to be transported to work. You're going to arrive there approximately the same amount of time. You kind of know what the expectations are. So, again, that's that outcome basin. Once you're in the torus, that you kind of know what generally to expect, So it's like coming down this big water slide, shoop, and then you fly out the end and you end up in the water. You can kind of expect that. That's where you're going to be. That's your outcome basin. So, self-similarity. Okay, self-similarity. The simplest nonlinear system is the torus. Okay, so again, non-linear, because just that line on a paper would be linear. There's no variation. But the simplest nonlinear system is the torus. It has one loose but stable outcome basin. So again, let's think of that. You get up in the morning, you're going to go to work. So, you have some kind of breakfast, you do through your routine, get in your car, get on the road. You're probably taking the same way to work. Maybe sometimes you vary it up a little bit, but ultimately, you're going to get to work. Okay. And probably arrive within the same time, and distinguishing one trip from another trip to another trip to another trip, there's not going to be a lot of variation between that, so that's a nonlinear system, because every day is different that you do that commute to work, because of the cars around you, the temperature, the weather, and things like that. So, but the dynamics of the torus are marked by self-similarity. Self-similarity as a concept, firms and entire societies, it may be very similar day to day, year to year, generation to generation. Okay. So, when you say year to year, generation, like going to school as an elementary student, it kind of fits into a torus. You get up in the morning, school, the bells, that you go to different classes, that you have lunch, you have recess, and things like that. It kind of falls within this torus. Again, remember that torus is a bagel, so you can move within that bagel. You have some parameters you can move within if you're trying to start at the top of the bagel, work your way through the bagel back up to the top. So no one embodiment in any given cycle or iteration of the behavior of any given system is precisely like a previous embodiment. So meaning, what you do today, even if you try to replicate it tomorrow as perfect as you can, you're not going to be able to do that, because what's going to change? Well, the context and situation. Weather's going to change a little bit. You've changed a little bit, depending upon even your energy level has changed fractional because of what you eat and what you haven't. The experiences you've learned today influence what you do tomorrow. All of those types of things, people you're going to interact with and things like that. So you can never have the same day twice. You cannot have the Groundhog's Day from what was it, the Bill Murray movie, which actually was never identically the same day twice. There were some, minor variations in that too, but pretty close to it. You're not going to have the Groundhog's Day. So I talked about driving to work. I mean, when I drive to work, I'm operating within a torus most of the time, not a Ford Taurus, a Torus as in Torus, meaning I have the same vehicle, I have the same route, but there's different cars on the road every day. They're driving different speeds, different merging. Sometimes you have delays. However, ultimately, I arrive at work at the same time, roughly every day. And I could say, generally like to drive pretty similar to the previous one, pretty similar. Now, chaos. Chaos would be something that changes my trip to work so drastically that all of a sudden it's removed from the torus. So you're not operating inside this bagel or this inner tube anymore. Something has happened so dramatically that you're outside of that. You're outside of that. Now you've entered chaos, okay? And that could be like an accident, it could be severe weather, it could be vehicle failure. So once you're in that, now that basin that you're in is no longer predictable. This basin is filled with chaos, and chaos will play out to where eventually you'll get some sort of stability. So if it is vehicle failure, let's say the engine cuts out or something like that. Well, I mean, then there's a sequence you'd go through of calling for assistance, or police would come by or whatever. Severe weather, eventually that weather will pass. It might do some damage to the vehicle. Who knows? Hopefully, there won't be any damage to you, if you pull off to the side, that you wouldn't be hit by anyone else. If you're in an accident, if you are hurt in that chaotic situation, there's going to be medical care on scene to transport you to the hospital and so forth. But chaos brings you outside of that. So on 9/11, the chaotic events, which everybody knew the moment that the Twin Towers had been hit. This isn't my Starbucks day. I'm not picking up my dry cleaning today. It's going to be significantly different for me. They realized that, and consciously realized that, not unconsciously, but consciously realized that. And that immediately changed their Torus, because their Torus was now unpredictable. They were now in a chaos-based Torus. So their basin was going to be, they were delivered into a very chaotic situation that then they would have to work through. And chaos doesn't perpetuate forever. It does, you go into chaos, like what would happen when the Twin Towers were hit, also when they collapsed, and then eventually you work out of chaos. Once you're evacuated from the site, once you get cleaned up, you get some food, your life kind of follows more into a normal pattern. So, other examples. So routine dynamics inside of a factory, an office, a hospital, a school, or a prison, they have the characteristics of a Torus. So getting up in the morning, you can probably pretty clearly map out how your day is going to be, what to expect. And you're going to be pretty close. You're going to be within that Torus. Now, again, what your lunch is going to be, that's going to be different. Timing on some things might be different. Some interference might happen, but largely you're going to stay within that Torus. You're going to bounce around within that Torus, but it's going to move you from that start to that finish line. And I think what happens sometimes is people think of being very linear, like a start point and a finish, like how similar that every day is to the next day. But actually it's not. Your days are very, very different. If you broke them down into, actually like just think of that drive, like, you get in the vehicle, the information you've learned the day before, what you have with you, what you're wearing, what the temperature of the vehicle is, what the temperature is outside, the visibility, other vehicles around you, what they're deciding to do, the path of the traffic, what you're thinking, all of these things. I mean, once you add these things in, those are many, many variables that change your path within that Torus, okay? Still keeps you out of chaos. It just keeps, so we think we're very rational beings. And there's some arguments saying nobody's rational. Everybody's irrational, and it's just the way that things are. And not that irrationality is bad, but just the reality is that rationality is false and rationality is true. And I think the rationality of thinking like, well, today was the same as yesterday, or tomorrow's going to be the same as today. No, it cannot be. We objectively know it cannot be. So no 2 points in time can be identical. So we talked about, like my ride to work in the morning. So it's similar. And you get familiar with it, but it's never the exact day-to-day, and it never can be the exact day-to-day. Think about and the wear on the tires. Tires have a little bit more wear. Highway has a little bit more wear, whatever. So you always have these variables which have changed. So think of this, okay? Similarity replaces sameness. Okay, I'm going to slow this down a little bit. Similarity replaces sameness. We do not have sameness as human beings. We do not have sameness from one moment to the next. We don't have it. Yeah, we'll say that. We'll say that many times. This is the same day as this, or this is the same, or we'll look at two things and we'll say, that is the same exact tractor as that one. Well, they're not. You could, even if they're made by the same company and the same people worked on them to make them, the same machinery, and whatever, you could break down the materials in each, the tolerances, how much, certain bolts were tightened and whatever, and you're going to find that there are variances, acceptable variances, but they're similar, okay? No two things are the same. No two things are the same. So that's important to make that, to delineate those terms between similarity and sameness. So, how many times do you hear people say, it's the same thing day after day after day after day? Same thing, same thing. No, it's not. No, it's not. So even in high tolerance manufacturing, there are similarities between items, but not sameness. So you might say, like, we have to have this to 0.000358 is we've got to be, within this tolerance of, that to 0.00410, so just this, these very minute differences. We have to follow, be within these tolerances, and you can do that, but you're still within these tolerances. It's not like you can create the same thing over and over and over again. It's like when they make coins, when they make coins, they can stamp a coin, and the first time they stamp, and the stamps are extremely durable. They etch these and they stamp out the coins. Well, the first, 10,000 coins come out really crisp. The next 10,000, not quite as crisp, and then it just degrades through that. And I don't know what, but I remember watching a documentary where after you get to so much use of a die, that's it. The die, then the coins are coming out as crisp. You have to replace and come up with a new die. And it's that same thing of, this quarter is not the same as this quarter because this quarter was struck with a little bit newer die, and this one was struck with a die that same die an hour later. So, these things of tolerances, they date back to the quality control experts such as W.E. Deming. We've probably heard a lot with Deming and manufacturing and quality control. So we know we will have statistical variation. And there's the human side of that too. It's called inter-rater reliability. How often do we get people together and we want people all to understand things in the same way? So, if you're working in a company, or even on a sports team or whatever, that everyone, inter-rater reliability is going to do things the same way, that they've been trained that they're going to do things the same way. And the reality is people aren't going to do things the same way. You can get kind of an understanding. So let's say even right now, as people are listening to this, and again, you are not the typical audience. I appreciate you. You're intellectual. You seek this out. But your interpretation of the Torus, even after I just went through the Torus, is going to be a little bit different than someone else. And because they have previous experiences, and they might already be thinking about the Torus and thinking about their own commute to work. Hey, let's say you commute an hour and a half to work. That person commutes 10 minutes to work. They're in the city. You commute through some country stuff. So right there, just those visual imagery start to change what that interpretation of that Torus is. So, and the other part is, inter-rater reliability is good. I work on that in classes I teach, where I try to take some terms such as mainstreaming, inclusion, tolerance, and acceptance, and at least have people understand what my interpretation of those terms are. So when we get into discussions, they can assess my interpretation. They can introduce their own bias, their own life experience into their interpretation of that, but at least they know where I'm coming from on that. So remember, you can never reproduce context and situation. This is big also, when I talk about work I do in legal cases, but you can never reproduce context and situation. Like I went out biking, last week. It was sunny. It was beautiful. It was a wonderful day. And the next day it rained. So, I could have gone out, 24 hours later, been out on the bike, done all of this, of the similar things, put the gloves on, probably wouldn't have put them on the same way, and, packed similar, amounts of water and things like that and gone out. But what would have changed the context would have changed. It was raining. So no matter what I did, if I would have gone out the same distance, I think I did 44 miles that day. I would have gone out my 44 miles and come back. I would have been soaking wet. It would not have been the same trip, So it's one of those things. Again, remember that you cannot reproduce context and situation. So if somebody, says, I can do the same thing again, you might be able to do something similar again, but context and situation is very, very significant. We have other factors, subjectiveness, okay, which comes into your previous experiences, your own biases. Not that those are bad, but again, just that they're there. And in your sense perception, meaning that how I interpret, if I'm outside and I can smell, my neighbor's cooking on the grill, smells really good, but when my daughter smells, it smells even better, because as you get older, your sense of smell isn't as keen as it is when you're younger. And also what you see, what you feel, what temperature is, what temperature means, to one person. Is it warm? Someone who thinks it's cool and they're wearing a sweater, and you think it's warm and you're out there in short sleeves. So it's that perception of the environment too, which brings forward the question that I posed earlier. Are we all irrational? Is society, is life irrational? Meaning that we really have no means for rational measurement, because as humans, we are taking information in through our senses and through the tools that we have created, which we know can never have perfect reliability over time. Like we can't produce one Model T that's going to be identical to the next Model T. They can be similar, they can't be identical. They can be very, very similar, they can't be identical. And again, what changes over time? Especially for us, we are never the same day after day, moment after moment, because we've learned, we've acquired, other things have happened to us, whether it's been good or bad. It has changed us. So the question that I'm going to leave you with, and I'm not going to really answer this one, I think the answer is probably self-evident, but are we rational or are we irrational? So let's talk about the Robbers Cave experiment. And we can make the link between what we just talked about with the Torus, self-similarity, and then also into the Robbers Cave experiment. So remember that Torus is saying every day is kind of the same thing, that we can expect, that more or less we're going to fall in this same, we're going to operate within the bagel. So, we're going to function. We can go a little bit out to the crust of the bagel, but, we're going to stay kind of within that bagel. We're going to make our circle. So we're inside that bagel. So, Muzaffar Sharif was a social psychologist who, in the summer of 1954, worked on a study that was aimed to support his proposed theory known as realistic conflict theory, which accounts for group conflict, negative prejudices, and stereotypes as being the result of competition between groups for desired resources. Or in a nutshell, when the resources get scarce, people in groups will turn against each other and diligently work to defend the scarce resources and the right to those resources. Important and relevant, because I'm going to make the reference to my book, Lessons of Lower Manhattan, as hundreds of thousands of people were evacuated from Lower Manhattan, which is not an easy place to evacuate from, Battery Park and that area. Not a lot of ports back in 2001. So, you had boats coming up and having to lay over wooden planks so people could get on board. But anyway, hundreds of thousands of people orderly, cooperatively waiting for their opportunity to get on a boat to exit Lower Manhattan following the World Trade Center attacks. And again, 9/11, 2001. So if we have this realistic conflict theory and you it's surfacing, where you can get together, you're getting along with people, and then all of a sudden resources become scarce. And in this case, in 9/11, let's think about it, the resources would be the boats and being able to get off of Lower Manhattan. Why wasn't there a mob? Why wasn't that chaos? Why didn't that just break out into a frenzy? And I talked about that with, one of the reasons might be transference. And I think there's some other reasons that go into that. One also, being that people do tend to follow. We did a very, very much we had a very skilled rescue force. Out of 100, I believe 34 boats, 50 were tugs, which was predominant, 37%. And I went back and I researched in 2001 what it took to be a deckhand, more or less a worker on a tugboat. And then, of course, you get promoted after a few years or multiple years, up into the captain role. But you have to take, courses. You had to take courses today. You still have to. It's rigorous training. You have to pass a Coast Guard examination. And then the harbor, would get foggy. And in winter, there would be blizzards. It'd be hard to navigate. So like tugboat captains would say, this is not an easy job at all. And then, of course, having to work together with other tugboats to navigate larger ships into the harbor, and further up into the Hudson. So, you had, this group of tugboat, the tugboats that were working on Lower Manhattan, I think also helped contribute to a very efficient rescue. So I'll get into that, but I think it goes on both sides. When resources are scarce, and the resources knowing that, I want a place on a tugboat or somewhere else because I want to be out of here. I'm having the ash, the soot, which is going over my head. It's all in my hair. It's all over my clothes. I'm breathing it in. But yet, you see this organized rescue before you, and this transference, which I talked about before. And I think you can remain orderly in that situation. And you've also are now outside of your Torus. You are clearly knowing that your day is completely outside of a routine. You are conscious of that, and you know that it's going to have to follow a different basin. It's in a chaos basin. Chaos always works its way out of chaos. So you're in a chaos situation, and you're going to work your way out of chaos. So you recognize that right away. On 9/11. So let's get back to this robber's cave experiment. Really fascinating stuff. Never would be allowed today. Okay, would be deemed as unethical. No university would approve this, but it was a field experiment, involved two groups of 12-year-old boys at Robbers Cave State Park in Oklahoma. 22 boys in the study altogether. They were unknown to each other and all from white middle-class backgrounds. So can we generalize the sample? Nope, we can't do it. We can't generalize it because they're all from middle-class white backgrounds. So we know we can't generalize it. We didn't have any females also in the study, but nonetheless, it's an interesting study. So let's talk about it some more. So it had phases. The first phase, the boys were split up. They were randomly assigned to two groups, and they're encouraged to bond with their groups. They're doing activities of bonding, activities such as campfires, swimming, things like that. So you got to know your group. Now, they did not know that the other group existed. So they were working each in their own groups, getting to know each other. And one group named themselves, they came up with their own names. One was the Eagles, and the other group was the Rattlers. And then they created some logos, and they had that on their T-shirts and also on their flags. Okay, so the first phase was getting them acclimated to each other so that they got to know each other and bond with each other. The second phase was a competition phase where all of a sudden the two groups were introduced to each other. Here is the Eagles. Hey, here's the Rattlers. And they were put into a competitive stage. So where friction was going to grow between these groups, and this was going to happen for 4 to 6 days. So you take these two groups and you have them play baseball, games of tug of war. The winners were very graciously awarded. Cumulative scores were kept. So ultimately, like which group had the most points. One group, if they won, they were allowed to go to supper. And then the second group, that wasn't the winner. By the time they got to supper, everything was gone. So there were hard feelings there, but it was all designed to have it play out that way. Now, I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Meatballs with Bill Murray from the late 70s. It kind of reminded me of a little bit of that, this study where you had Camp North Star, which was more of the economy summer camp, and then you had Camp Mohawk, which was the elite camp. Now, it wasn't broken down kind of like that, but it did pit, definitely these two groups against each other. So the Rattlers, the Rattlers were named the overall winners, that they had the overall point total. And then they portrayed themselves as being very confident after that, absolute confidence. They kind of took over the playing field. They planted their flag on the mound, and they started to threaten the Eagles. Okay, remember, you had this other group, the Eagles. They were kind of, it was verbal threats and just kind of some taunts and just saying, don't mess with it, don't mess with us, don't mess with our flag, don't mess with our territory. We're number one, stuff like that. Okay. The prejudice increased from name calling to physical altercations. The Eagles burned the Rattlers' flag, and then the Rattlers ransacked the Eagles' cabin and stole private property. Okay, again, remember the Rattlers won. They take over this ball diamond and they plant their flag, and they're kind of taunting the Eagles. The Eagles are like, we're not having any part of this. Okay, so the Eagles then go and take the Rattlers' flag and burn it. But then the Rattlers get even by ransacking the Eagles' cabin, stealing private property, things that would have never happened a week prior. But we're talking about there's this fierce competition going on. And now there's this competition, there's a sense of resources. Like, it's not only the praise that people are getting, but it's like resources. They're getting rewards, but they're also getting food. So, like, if you don't win, you might not even get your supper. So it is this competition for resources. And I think also this bravado that comes in here of this praise for winning and this glorifying of winning. So eventually what happened was the groups they became so aggressive toward each other that they had to be separated, okay? And the researchers had to separate them. So the study confirmed the researchers' realistic conflict theory. Sharif is realistic conflict theory, meaning that once people could work together and work together well and collaborate and cooperate, but what would happen is once resources became scarce, people would kind of get off into their own groups. Now we see this in modern day, like the TV shows. Who's going to get voted off the island and stuff like that, and that's all dramatized and things like this. In this case, these boys had no idea they were part of an experiment, and this just all kind of naturally developed. What I find fascinating from this is that this is not what happened at 9/11 at the rescue. You didn't have people pushing toward the front of the line. And again, you had a very pressuresome context and situation. You literally had, just this heavy soot, coming out toward the harbor. So when people would get on the boats to be rescued and go out into the harbor, the boats would actually list to whatever side would be the better view back onto lower Manhattan, so people could see what was going on, back at the site of, 9/11 and the financial district. So just some fascinating stuff, because there are other studies with adults saying that, there is this grace period of about 3 days that if you kind of have societal stress, something happens, maybe, a tornado goes through, wipes out some of the resources in an area, maybe wipes out, that you don't have, water, some other things, that there is this cooperation that kind of surfaces for about 3 days, and then that kind of fades after that. And just very interesting. So the rescue at 9/11, part of, there's so many things people ask about that when I do interviews. And I said, well, a few things obviously contributed to the 9/11 boat rescue of 500,000 people in 9 hours, which was remarkable because I think Dunkirk, it was fewer people. It took like 9 days to do, more organized. It was a military plus civilian rescue, but definitely more organized. So what were some of the factors? Well, one is it was daytime and it was sunny, so you could see. The harbor was relatively calm. You had that going for you. It was September, so you didn't have a lot of tourists, okay, and the weather was pretty decent. I mean, as far as it wasn't too hot, it wasn't too cold. So you had a lot of things that actually worked in favor contextually for the rescue. So imagine that same attack, occurs, and it is, in winter, and so, it's going to get dark earlier. Your people are not going to be able to see out in the harbor. You're not going to have as efficient rescue in the harbor because the boats aren't going to be able to go as fast across the harbor. It's going to be cold. People are going to need clothing. All of these factors that weren't there, or if it would have been raining on that day and so forth. It did rain several days after 9/11. So a lot of the rescue had to do with that, plus the fact that you did have a very highly trained rescue crew that responded. And this isn't mentioned in documentaries. So there are I think there were 146 boats that are documented to participate in the rescue. And of that, again, 50 were tugs, 37%, the majority. But documentaries focus kind of more on, if somebody was the captain of a fishing boat or something like that, heroic nonetheless. But actually, the majority of boats that responded were very versed in the harbor, and they're very versed in chaotic situations. And you also have it's called the harbor pilots, and they were in existence for 300 years, and their purpose was to help ships get in and out of the harbor, and I think there were 10 of those boats that were available that day. So it wasn't this novice hodgepodge group thrown together that one would assume. Okay, and that's what the articles, that's what some of the documentaries tend to portray out of 9/11, but it really wasn't that. It was a much more highly skilled group of people. And also these tugs, there was already this sense of symmetry, reliability. You did have a quick hierarchy establish, like an instant command system when Commander Loy of the Coast Guard said, people do whatever you have to do to get this rescue going. So you did have kind of an instant command system. It was loose, but you did have this order from the top, so it wasn't this horizontal structure. So, but some interesting stuff. So anyway, let's go back and let's just kind of review some of the things that we talked about today before we wrap up this show, and get into some sponsors and some thank yous and some updates that we're going to be doing here on the show. So, I want to go back over the terms. Think of Torus. So a Torus, some real world examples would be like an inner tube or a bagel. So think of this circular thing, but it's 3-dimensional, okay? It's not a line, it's 3-dimensional. If you're inside of this bagel, this inner tube, you can go, left, right, up, down, faster, things. And you're going to stay largely within that. That's going to be your day-to-day similar routine. When something so extreme happens that it knocks you out of that, so you're no longer a part of that, you're outside of that, then chaos has ensued. It's set in. And now you're dealing through a chaotic situation. You're not dealing with this known basin, or basin is just outcome, okay? So like if you're going to work every day and you're in this Torus, with different cars on the highway, different speeds, all these different variables, well, generally, it's going to be 7:35 and you're going to be at work, or 7:40. I mean, you're going to be there. So, but when chaos comes in, it's not predictable anymore. But chaos does have a way of working its way out, and things come out of chaos to get, once resources get on scene, and things typically only last for so long in a chaotic state. So we have that torus. So think about that torus. Again, you function within that torus, not your Ford Taurus, not the thoughts of your Ford Taurus, not my friend in college that had a Ford Taurus that wouldn't start in winter, had a jump started a few times. Torus, just meaning that your day is going to be similar probably to the next day and similar to the next day. So you have that similarity, but there is not sameness. We do not have sameness. We cannot achieve sameness. We do not have the technology to achieve sameness. And even if we did, we could not say that this notebook right here, for those of you watching in the video, is the same as the other notebook, because they each have a little bit of different composite. If we were to go and break down what it actually consists of, the notebook, the inks might have been put on at different steps in the process. So one ink might be just a tad bit thicker than the other ink on there, and so forth. The humidity, because the lower one might not be as humid as the top one, just all of those things. Okay. But what do we hear? What do we hear all the time? It's the same. It's the same. And think about life, and as people say things are very similar. The other part I want to stress to you is that it's fine to operate within a torus. You do not need to get this down to where you're operating in this linear, where you're trying to ratchet things down to these tolerances of your life, which are completely unrealistic. And you have to be also very aware, and this is where sense making comes in with Dr. Carl Weick out of University of Michigan. And I'm going to get more information on him. I know my question now for him. I've thought about this for a while, but it's how does the torus, how do you identify when sense making, when the situation has changed so much that you're no longer functioning within your torus? That's not easy, okay? Because it's actually not easy. For military pilots, one of the hardest things is to detect subtle changes. Overt changes, if you throw something very wild into a scenario, easily detectable, and there's a response to it. But it's these very subtle changes that do cause issues. So it's the things that we don't pay attention to because they function within that torus, and we generally know things are going to come back online. Again, on September 11, 2001, Amanda Ripley's book, she interviewed hundreds of survivors from the Twin Towers, and a number of them said, I stayed at my desk for 4 minutes. I was kind of just gathering stuff up and whatever, and just kind of waiting around. Why? Because when they would run the drills, the fire drills, they'd run for about 4 minutes. Some people would gather kind of in the commons area, the waiting area outside the elevators or the stairs, and then they'd wait 4 minutes and the little thing would sound saying drill's over. So, it was kind of that they weren't believing this was happening because this had not yet gone outside of their torus. They were still functioning within this kind of torus in that case. So, and then self-similarity. Self-similarity is a concept, with firms, with entire societies. Again, things are similar day to day, year to year. Self-similarity, meaning if you get up tomorrow, you go to the grocery store, you're going down the aisles, it's going to be pretty similar. You know where the carts are, the process, how the checkout works. Pretty similar. It's going to be pretty similar the way you get around. Pretty similar if you go to someplace that, I go to the go-kart track. I know they take the tickets. You get in, you're going to go on the track for a while. They're going to wave you off. I mean, the things are going to be pretty similar, that your food is going to be pretty similar, stuff like that. And generation to generation, that you're going to be going to school. Transportation is going to be pretty similar. Voting is going to be pretty similar. Now, we do have variations within society. Chaos comes in and out, but you do have these general similarities. So, just to reiterate on those. So I want to thank all of you. Again, you are exceptional listeners. This show is available on YouTube. Those of you watching it right now, I'm kind of leaning forward into the mic. I am getting a boom arm. The microphone is going to be elevated and closer to my mouth. So I'm going to be able to be back a little bit in the chair. That will be coming in soon. And want to thank the supporters of the show, the 405 Media out of Los Angeles, California, John Grant and the 405 Media. Thank you very much for airing this show daily, 2 o'clock p.m. PST. Also, thank you to Sprigeo out of Santa Barbara, SPRIGEO.com, the nation's leader in bullying, harassment, and threat reporting software for schools. ISS 24/7, ISS247.com, keeping large venues safe through instant management systems. A lot of them are app-based, very elaborate, but with an incredible user interface, very easy to use, just with basically images. Very efficient. Number of your NFL stadiums, that might seat 80,000 people. NFL, the NFL stadiums, NCAA arenas, shopping malls, population dense areas, doing their work to keep those areas safe, ISS 24/7. And also Aphonics, AUPHONIC. There's no S at the end, so it's Aphonic. Aphonic has a leveler program, which is very useful for podcasters or anyone wanting to produce anything. It's going to be an audio that you do have a standard volume level. And actually, believe it or not, there is a standard volume level for podcasting and for radio. It was something I was not aware of, but there is a standard level, and Aphonic can get your work to that standard level. Of course, you want to have the best equipment and the best procedures for recording coming into that. But if you it has a wonderful user interface. Basically, you drag the file over, put it in, process it, it comes out, and it's tagged with Aphonic on the end, so it's easy to find the file once it has been improved, enhanced greatly. So Aphonic, AUPHONIC.com, Aphonic.com. And just, again, wanting to let you know you can subscribe to this show on YouTube so you can see me. It is on iTunes. Please leave a review on iTunes if you could give it a listen. We are now, this is number 33 for our podcast. And it is also on SoundCloud and on the Podmosphere. So on SoundCloud, it's easy. You can go in and get the MP3. That's really nice to be able to do. I am on a number of different shows now. Readily Random is the one I'll be interviewed on Monday night, but do have others coming up, and am fortunate to now, with the growing audience, subscribe on Twitter at SafetyPhD. Please consider subscribing on Twitter at SafetyPhD, and you'll be able to get updates. I do post a lot of original content, blog posts and things like that too. I remove the rhetoric from safety, everybody. I remove the rhetoric from safety and give you exactly what you need to know. And you leave these shows, hopefully, with some new information that you're sharing with people. And they're like, hey, where'd you learn about the Torus? What's that all about? And self-similarity, it's like, I got that from the Safety Doc podcast. So, yeah, come back, make sure you subscribe, check in. I do have a number of guests on the show. So probably about half the show is interviews. We had Aaron Clary last week. He has published several books, very astute economist, and we have, more interviews coming up. I also, again, will be interviewing a commercial drone operator, very soon. And he's going to talk about, just amazing things that I didn't know about drones, and then also how drones can be used for safety. And, we will continue to evolve this show to look at agency and purpose, along with physical environment safety and cyberspace safety. So, again,